Hi everybody, today we are going to be looking at questions in English, part of our review of the basics of English grammar. As we look at questions in English, one of the key characteristics that we're going to see a lot of is what we call inversion. And when we're talking about inversion, we're talking about inversion of the first verb of the sentence. So that for a typical positive sentence, you would have subject, then verb. When you invert this, you're going to have verb, then subject. Now we'll see this certainly when we're looking at sentences that use the verb be. We'll also see this when we use auxiliary verbs like do and have. We'll also see this when we use, for example, the modal auxiliary verbs like can, could, must, will, would, shall, should, etc. Let's look at some examples, and that will start to give us a feel for the ways in which we form the questions in English. So looking at a positive sentence, the sales decline was driven by a big drop in private purchases. How are we going to make that into a question? First, you want to identify the subject and the verb. So, the subject is the sales decline. The verb is was. As we make this a question, we're going to invert the order and we're going to ask, was the sales decline driven by a big drop in private purchases? Now we'll answer this by saying yes it was or no it wasn't. Let's look at another example. Falling oil prices have been causing stock values to decline. Why have falling oil prices been causing stock values to decline? This is another question. We're going to make this question, in this case, using what we call a question word, why. And in this case, we're in the verb tense of present perfect. So we have this sense of inversion, and is this the only way to make this sentence a question? No, it's not. But it is the easiest and the clearest way. So it's the way that we will do it most often. We could also say, for example, the sales decline was driven by a big drop in private purchases, right? Now, by my pronunciation, I raise my tone at the end, right? And therefore, the listener is going to know that by putting this on the end, it's what we call technically a question tag, that this is a question. So, this type of question form we usually use when we already think we know the answer and we just really want confirmation of it. All right, let's look at some more questions, making some more questions. So, Mario was studying for his political theory exam when I saw him in the library yesterday. How are we going to make that a question? Okay, pick out the subject, pick out the verb, invert them, and you get, was Mario studying for his political theory exam when you saw him in the library yesterday? Another verb tense. He had sent the customer the order before he realized that it was incomplete. How are we going to make that a question? So, the subject, obviously, he. Now, what's the first verb? The first verb is the auxiliary verb had. So we are going to move that auxiliary verb before the subject. Had he sent the customer the order before he realized that it was incomplete? Okay, so now we're going to look at another situation where we're going to use an auxiliary verb and we're going to put it before the subject, but it's a little less obvious. So the sentence, the positive sentence that we're going to look at here She wanted to see Frankie Cosmos perform in Paris in February. Now, we're not going to invert the order of she and the main verb in this case. Instead, we are going to take what you can think of as almost being an implied auxiliary. That auxiliary is do. And do is what we'll always use when we want to indicate that a sentence is a question. So in this case, it's a past tense, so we're going to use the past tense of do, did. So we will end up with, did she want to see Frankie Cosmos perform in Paris in February? Now, we could also do this the same way we did with the question tag before, if we really kind of knew that this was the case, and say, she wanted to see Frankie Cosmos perform in Paris in February, didn't she? All right. So we've seen a bunch of different kind of questions, so let's kind of step back, try to go through it a little more slowly, make sure that you're really getting all of this detail. So we'll start off, a positive statement. Stephen is tall. We're using be as a linking verb. In this case, it's the only verb, so we are going to switch this to form a question and ask, is Stephen tall? A negative form of the same question would be, isn't Stephen tall? All right, now let's look at a little more complex sentence. The positive statement. NVIDIA's $40 billion agreement to acquire ARM from SoftBank is likely to meet strong opposition from NVIDIA's chip industry rivals. Now, it's a much longer sentence, but the situation is the same. The verb is a linking verb. The verb to be is, and that's just going to move out to the front in the question form. Is NVIDIA's $40 billion agreement to acquire ARM from SoftBank likely to meet strong opposition from NVIDIA's chip industry rivals? Or the negative form, we're just going to bring the negated form of the verb to the front and ask, isn't NVIDIA's $40 billion agreement to acquire ARM from SoftBank likely to meet strong opposition from NVIDIA's chip industry rivals? Or, let's take that final form that we've looked at, which is the question tag, and ask, NVIDIA's acquisition of ARM from SoftBank is likely to meet strong opposition from NVIDIA's chip industry rivals, isn't it? And the answer, yes it is, or perhaps no it isn't. Now, just to point out, this is because we're asking what we think of in English as yes or no questions. They can obviously be answered with yes or no. So let's look at a different type of question, which is the subject question. A subject question is one where we are looking for information about the subject. Very typically, these sentences will begin with who or which. For example, who is the new chef at Capsuto Frere? Which companies objected to the merger? Who isn't attending the conference? Which students didn't complete the assignment? Which part of the exercise that we did in class last Monday was the most difficult? Now here, this is an example of a sentence in which it may be a little bit hard to identify what part of it is the subject. One thing that can help you identify it is just go in there and look and figure out where's the verb. So the verb in this case, was. So what we're looking for as the answer is something like, the most difficult part of the exercise was question number 3, for example. All right, so this has been a very quick run through of subject questions. Now let's look at Object questions. Object questions we often think of in English as WH questions because they'll often use one of these words at the beginning. Who, which we also use with subject questions, of course, what, when, where, why, and how. And we'll also actually sometimes use which, like we did with subject questions too, but just pay attention and you'll be able to see whether the who or the which is referring to a subject or an object. So also quite common to use several of these in combination with some further information. So you would put them together and have, for example, what color, how often, which brand, how many. All right, so let's look at some examples. How badly does Ford need to reclaim lost mid-size market share from Toyota and Honda? What type of new products has Elaine worked on in the last few months? As we answer this, she's worked on 3 new plant-based meat products. All right, I know this is a lot of information, but let's recap. Let's go back over. Aaron is tall. Is Aaron tall? Is she still growing? So here are 2 examples of using be either as a linking verb in the first case. Aaron is tall. It links Aaron to tall. We switch the order. Is Aaron tall? She is still growing. This is present continuous. Is in this case is an auxiliary verb. So we're going to swap that and put that before the subject, she. Is she still growing? Sophidel will introduce 2 new products on Thursday. This is a positive statement. Let's look at some different variants of questions that we might make. Will Sophidel introduce 2 new products on Thursday? Will is a modal auxiliary verb. Because it's an auxiliary, we're going to just put that before the subject to make the question form. All of the modal auxiliary verbs, can, could, may, must, might, will all form questions in the same way. Auxiliary verbs, does. Does Sophidel plan to introduce any new products on Thursday? How many new products will Sophidel introduce on Thursday? What type of question is this? This is an object question because the subject is Sophidel, but what we're asking about is the new products, the object. Sophidel is the actor, and then new products is the object. What will Sophidel introduce on Thursday? When will Sophidel introduce some new products? Has Sophidel introduced any new products in the last year? Here we are again, an example of switching the order of the auxiliary verb, in this case in the present perfect, and we end up with, has Sophidel introduced any new products in the last year? How many new products has Sophidel introduced in the last year? How many new products will Sophidel have introduced by the end of the quarter? This is actually going even a little beyond what we perhaps have practiced now, and we have here a future perfect, but it all still follows all those same rules. Now, obviously, there are lots of details, lots of nuances about questions. To learn more about it, find some exercises to practice, go to pinterest.com/unblockyourenglish and check out everything there.